Hey, welcome everybody. John Alexander with you on another episode of Deep Dive Podcast. And this week I brought onto the podcast with me a friend that I've known for many years. I think we'll go back 15, 17 years now. And one of the most impressive people I've met. And so I've got a handful of really, really impressive people that have just met, to me, they're like mega achievers. And I thought you guys could get a lot out of a conversation with him today. We're going to deep dive into where he came from, what he's doing now, and maybe pick up some great nuggets, just like I've done over the years from him. I'm still learning from him. And he's been a mentor, helper, consultant to so many people. You know some of these names: Victor Hansen, Tony Robbins, Dean Graziosi. But anyway, it goes on and on. I'm going to bring him on right now. His name is Dave Lundgren, and he is with us live. Dave, are you there?
Hey, John, I'm here.
Perfect.
Good morning.
Hey, good to have you. I'm so excited to talk to you today. I know that we've been talking late about, some things of, hey, how can entrepreneurs like take and go to that next level, and what does it take to get there? And I wanted to bring you on so that you can give us some insight, because you worked with some of the greats. I think you've headed up two of Tony Robbins' sales divisions. And I think everybody knows the business mastery that he's, has. And tell us a little bit about, maybe, first of all, how did you come to basically become who you are as far as your basic background? Because I know you also have a Master of Science in Family Therapy. You're known as America's chaplain, and you've, of course, been a service member and the chaplain there. So, you've got this varied background, and I kind of wanted to speed through basically from where you started to kind of where you are now, and then let's kind of like dive in and get some really good stuff today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, John, and the flattering words. And like you said, we met 17 years ago, and immediately we just developed, I think, a rapport and respect. And so I really appreciate the chance to talk to your audience. I've always admired and appreciated, our relationship. And yeah, to your point, 22 years ago, I left the Army as a chaplain, had the Master's in Family Therapy, and came into the coaching educational space, in 2000, and that parlayed into doing a lot of active real estate. So, you mentioned Dean Graziosi. That was a relationship that started in 2005. Did a lot of stuff together when he was doing all his infomercials, and that's really how the Tony Robbins piece came about. So I've been around this coaching space before that, being a chaplain. And done hundreds of real estate deals myself on the education side, been part of the biggest organizations. And like you said, consulting folks behind the scene, the CEOs, helping them in their personal lives and even in their businesses. And then, it was Dean who invited me to come work with Tony and run the a couple sales teams, including Business Mastery, which is wonderful because Tony's a force of nature. He's amazing, as is Dean. And that really just helped me on the next level from a business consulting standpoint. Combine that with a coaching background and, chaplain and therapy. And that's what, you and I were talking recently. One question we both had is it's amazing in the coaching world. Like, you provide amazing products. I mean, back in the day, some of the things that you taught me about notes and creative real estate, I was blown away, which is actually why I reached out to you years ago. But it's fascinating to me that I've watched people who will take your course or Business Mastery, Tony Robbins, or whatever it is. And I literally have watched thousands of folks over the years. Some of them are wildly successful, and then some of them aren't. And that's the question you and I are asking, why is that? What is the difference between those people and, the ones that succeed and the ones that don't? And so if that would serve the audience, that's one question we had. And, I could certainly talk more about my background and what I've been up to lately. But
well, I mean, first of all, I just want to mention you've written a great book here. As soon as you came up with that, I grabbed it. I was probably one of the first people that kept bugging you till you released it, because it took a while to get released. And, I've basically, I've got it all marked up now, because it's like, I keep finding great nuggets in there, and then you can kind of dive deeper. I like to blend that in here as well. But,
yeah.
I that question you brought up, and, I remember specifically, and I think for most of us coaches, especially, we're always wanting our students to succeed. We want them to be the best, and so we're always questioning ourselves. Am I delivering the best that I can? Which also can lead to some other problems. I can probably, some of the stuff you're in your book. Hey, is it my fault if somebody doesn't succeed? Yeah, they've gone through and paid me money, and I've given them the answer. But I had this, and I want you to answer this question for me, because this is really where I started with that question, because I saw two people. They worked at the same place. So they were like, I could talk to either one. I was getting the same thing. These were two students who came into one of my live seminars for 2 days. I went through all my information, and I taught them how to go out there and be successful at doing this type of flip that I'm teaching. Yep. There's a difference between teaching somebody to be successful and teaching them how to go out there and flip property. Those are two totally different things, which I think your book starts to kind of delve into as well. But they went back, and one became a millionaire doing this. In other words, he earned over $1 million in profits doing it. The other never did his first deal.
Yep.
So that's when this thing said, wow, they sat in the same room, side by side, heard the same thing. One succeeded, one didn't. And so that's why I really would like for you to give us some feedback as far as what you think that, some of the reasons are.
No, it's a great question. And I appreciate the reference to the book. I mean, you're an author. I've read your stuff and I always enjoyed it. And actually, so at the highest level, and then we'll drill down, this book, audaciously titled The Answer, I crossed out the put the word and, unanswer potentially, really came from the same question for me personally. Because despite all of the background I had, being a chaplain, being around the Tony Robbins and the coaching world forever, I found myself going through my dark night of the soul, literally sitting on the beach in Hawaii, and the love of my life ghosted, like out of there. And so I had to ask myself the same question. How does that happen? How does a guy who's got all this background, been around success and had wild success, had ups and downs like everybody, how in the world do I find myself in that position? So that question for me personally, which I never intended to write a book or do anything about, led to me diving deep on studying both science and the spiritual side of life and personal development, and everything going much deeper. And what I found is that most personal development, religion, psychology, self-help is amazing. Love it. Studied all of it. But most of the time it's dealing with symptoms, and it doesn't go all the way upstream to what I believe are two core foundational laws and principles that can create success in every area of your life. So that's what this book is about. And so your body, your relationships, your spirituality, and business. And so there's one specific part that talks about the business side of it, and that's what I want to dive in deeper on. But that's kind of the background, high level, where that book came from. And so how does that impact business, right? And they're all interrelated, right? So one of these, core principles is oneness, right? And both this scientific side of the world and the religious side of the world agree on oneness. And that's a whole separate conversation. But it doesn't matter what your background is, whether you're an atheist, whether you're religious, man, woman, black, white, whatever it is, this core foundational principle matters, and everything's interrelated in your life. Meaning, like the private clients I work with, man, we jump into their business, but guess what? Then we start talking about their marriage. Then we start talking about their workout habits and their spiritual life, whether they're religious or not. And so it's all interrelated. So as you and I dive deep on business, I think everybody understands, man, it has a interdependence and impact on everything else. So given that context, then, okay, as you and I were chatting, okay, how does that impact us as coaches, like the ones delivering the content, the ones that are creative and producing that, and then how do we best serve our clients, and why do some succeed and why others don't? Why does one brother become a millionaire and the other doesn't? And Tony Robbins, who I love and is a mentor, he says all the time, and I believe it, 80% of success is psychology, 20% is strategy. And I believe that. But what I learned is going further upstream, as I keep talking about, I would say most of psychology is actually upstream from that. Meaning you hear a lot about mindset, which is true. And everything Tony and other people that, have results in the marketplace, when they talk about mindset, listen, because it's true. But going deeper and I guess further upstream from that, because if you think about thoughts lead to behaviors, lead to habits, lead to outcomes, that's true. But where do our thoughts come from? And those are the questions I started asking myself, why, and taking a deeper dive on mindset. So for example, if indeed most of psychology is coming from something deeper or further upstream, if we can go to the root of the issue, if we can go all the way upstream to the headwaters and take care of it there, everything that moves downstream from our thoughts to then our behavior, to then our habits, to then the outcomes we see in our business or our life, they have an impact. So one quick, simple example that I talk about in the book, and I'm visual, and so I have illustrations in the book, but everybody's seen and can visualize the analogy of the iceberg, right? Where most of our thoughts are underneath the water. So you've got this water, this ocean, 5% of our mind is, above water with a conscious mind, and then 95% is underneath, the subconscious mind. And I believe that, and that's really been proven. And if you don't believe your subconscious mind is powerful, I mean, right now, can you feel the butt on your seat underneath your butt? Or if you're standing up, can you feel, your feet standing? Well, you can't now that I mentioned it, because I created focus to think about that. But most of the time, you're not thinking about those things. And 95% of what's going on around, from your heartbeat to your breathing to all these things, your subconscious mind just takes care of that. And you're only focused on about 5% of what's happening in front of you. And that's a beautiful thing, because our minds would be overwhelmed. I mean, we have 60,000 thoughts a day. There's all the stimulus coming in, and our subconscious minds just, weed most of that out and just kind of keep things running for us while we're focused on 5%. So all that is true. It's been proven. My thought, though, is going further upstream, how can we impact that subconscious mind? And there's several ways to do it. But looking back at that analogy, and the illustration I have in the book is, if your subconscious mind is that underneath the water iceberg piece, well, the ocean then would be what I would call your Atman, or your soul, or the part of you that has always existed and is much bigger. And even scientifically, they've proven outside of your physical body, you have an energy impact that has an influence. So there's a part of us, again, whatever your background is, you can scientifically or religiously look at, there's something more to me than just my mind. And that's where I go with clients and getting centered there, because then everything downstream has more impact. So psychology is important. Man, let's go upstream and get centered on whatever that is for people individually, because once they get centered in that deepest part of themselves, well, it has impacted not only their business, but everything else.
So from my standpoint, from listening to what you said, and just correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying what a lot of us teach, which is mindset, because we all know how important that is. That's at one level, but what you're addressing here is another level above that, which then somehow controlling that. Is that what I'm getting? That if you get this top piece right, it affects the mindset, which then affects the physical reality that our lives are. So it's like three phases.
Yes, 100%. And I like the way you phrase it. And really, for me, and I think most entrepreneurs, they're either smart or they're lazy or they're both, right? And when I say lazy, just, hey, let's find an efficient way to get things done. Right. And that's what it's all about. So for me, think about those 60,000 thoughts, right? And there's control versus the art of allowing. So what I've learned and what I've experienced myself, when I found myself sitting on the beach in Hawaii, man, control and being the type A, hard charging, masculine entrepreneur gets you so far, and you can get results by doing that and by controlling. And I'm just going to go hard charging. You hear a lot about grinding in the marketplace. There's value in that, and that will get you to a certain level for sure. My proposition, though, is instead of trying to control 60,000 thoughts and so focused on mindset, go further upstream, and what can have an influence to your mindset. And the more centered you can get there, then your mindset just naturally is better, right? So
what would that be then? So I hear you, but what are you saying we need to do at this top part?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's very individualized. So for some folks, like it's meditation, right? Like for me, I was raised in a fundamentalist kind of Orthodox Christian background. Meditation to me sounded like witchcraft 4 years ago. Well, the reality is, if you're Christian, Christ went off and meditated. Like, he needed time away from people. Like, I just need to go be with my Father. And so that's, for me personally, and for a lot of my clients, that's one example, right? And so this subconscious mind, there's really 4 things you can do to impact your subconscious mind. And for me, getting into what's called the theta state, I don't want to go too deep down into the frequencies of your brain, but when you first wake up in the morning, kind of that somewhat groggy state, or when you first doze off, those 2 moments, your brain automatically just goes into theta state. So that's kind of like what mild hypnosis, or if you get into a meditative state, then your mind is receptive to subconscious programming. So that's one example of just when I say being centered, putting yourself in a position where you have moments, especially if you're a business owner or a CEO, because in the coaching and stuff that I do, and having run Business Mastery, I can tell you 99% of business owners feel overwhelmed, they feel stressed out, and they feel like they're in the weeds and the business owns them. They don't own the business. So one of the things I teach people is, you, by definition, one of the things a CEO has to do is be a visionary and create vision. To do that, you've got to separate yourself. So whether it's meditation, as I brought up as one example, this to quiet your mind, quiet the 60,000 thoughts going on, get centered inside of yourself, so then you can have moments of inspiration, inspiratu, in spirit. And one moment of inspiration is worth more than 100 hours of perspiration. So that's one example. Another is, some people, for them, it's working out. I have a client, she runs 100-mile marathons or whatever, right? But she gets herself in a creative mindset by working out. For some people, it's their spiritual practices, whatever background they come from. There's a deep spiritual practice they have that leads them to inner peace. Whatever it is, man, it's shutting the phone off. It's quieting the noise of the world. It's quieting the noise of your mind. And so I give you a few examples, but there's a lot of ways people can do that. And there's individual, practices, and they all work as long as you can get to that centeredness, quiet your mind, and let your inner voice, that intuition that everybody has, start to speak and listen to it.
When you're saying that, it's making me think of how, when I was doing the grind, basically, it was up in the morning and my mind was already on business, and it wouldn't stop till I went to bed 1 o'clock sometimes. And that was year on year. And the only time I'm not going to say the only time, but when I could find what you're talking about, because you described a segment of this being able to quiet your mind. And that was when I left the city and went down to the beach, and I felt that, right? So it was like everything just got shut off, and all that calmness came back, and it made all the other bearable. First of all, not that this grind is so bad, but you just can't do it 24/7 around a year round. But then I found that you're right. I needed to get away from that. And for me, it was walking away from my house. So we bought this place in the country, and it was 5 acres. So I could leave the house and everything, the phone behind, and go out and sit on a ledge that overlooked the spring. And I would sit there, and that's where I found that. So what you're saying is that is a key component to being able to make all the rest actually work better, because I did find that I got inspiration there too. So it's not that you totally shut off. It allows you to open up more, is what you're saying, right?
100%. And I love, beach for me as well, man. A beach, being in the mountain, being at the lake. I got a lake house, or for me, it's in the sauna after a workout. So yes, whatever those quiet moments are for you is the beach. And here's what I learned. There is a difference between having a thought and receiving a thought. Having a thought versus receiving. Having is this control, trying to deal with these 60,000. Receiving a thought is what you said. And I would, as a creative guy who's written a lot of content and books, I would hope this resonates with you. It certainly does with me. But I heard like Bono of U2, my favorite band. He's like, the greatest songs just came to me. I didn't write them. They just came to me. Steve Jobs with Apple, right? As a pure visionary, same kind of thing. Now, he went into psychedelic drugs and whatever, and I don't have any judgment against that, but there's different ways to open up yourself and receive that inspiration and receive thoughts. And the greatest CEOs and the greatest leaders of the world outside of business, it's that. How do you get in a place to receive? And there's, like you said, I love the beach thing. There's a lot of different ways to do that. And I also love what you said about, man, there's an ebb and flow in life. People talk about balance, and to me, that word I think is misused or misunderstood, because the reality is balance means everything's equal and there's nothing really happening, versus I like to talk about ebb and flow. And there's a time and a season for everything. So there's a time and a season to hard charge and take the masculine energy and run with it. Whether you're male or female, doesn't matter. Masculine energy is that hard charging, action taking, and there's a time and a place for that. And then there's a time and a place for more of the feminine energy of just allowing and receiving, and both work. So I like to talk in terms of seasons or ebbs and flow, but make it a habit of creating that time for yourself. And it'll impact your business for damn sure, but it'll also impact the rest of your life, your body, your relationships, and certainly, wherever your spiritual walk is. So I love how you phrase that. And beach for sure is a wonderful place to get away.
Well, when you mentioned the theta in the morning, the other place that I see that is so many of the ideas. Now that you said receive, I've never heard that before, Dave. I love that. Having a thought or receiving a thought. And as soon as you said that, I'm thinking, yeah. And there's places where I receive thoughts, which is usually in the morning. Like as soon as I'm still laying in bed, but now I'm awake, and those thoughts come back in or come in, and I can shut off, or I can receive thoughts, especially like in my business life. I'm receiving, and it just comes. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's some great idea, right?
Yeah.
So I get this great idea, then wake up later in the day. Sometimes turns out to be a horrible idea, or I tell my wife about it. She says, "That's crazy. Don't do that." Or it's something that has changed my entire business and made it great. So for some reason, and I guess there's a fluidness, because you can get maybe good thoughts or maybe wrong thoughts too at that point, because I guess you're floating in a way. You're I don't know if your brain cells. You tell me. You're the scientist.
Going back to, again, from a scientific standpoint, right? Let's assume somebody's an atheist and thinks purely logically, scientifically. Well, science today has verified that everything is energy, right? So everything, our books, the computers, our bodies, everything, if you break it down and keep breaking everything down, ultimately it's just fluctuations of energy. So whether you call that energy, or somebody who's religious might call that, hey, it's never been created, can never be destroyed. They're going to call that spirit or God. At the end of the day, it's the same essence. Call it infinite intelligence, call it love, call it God, whatever you want to call it. It's there, and we're all connected to it, and it's all a part of us. So as you're sitting in that state where your mind is quieted down, and I'm the same way. I'm a morning person. So I literally, I don't touch my phone. I don't look at email, I don't do anything. I have my morning routine, and that's when I receive a lot of those thoughts. And I'm very careful about my morning routine and how I lay myself down at night. But yeah, I don't care what you call it. And there's been too many wars and millions of people killed over trying to fight over whatever you want to call that.
Yeah.
But tapping into that, which we all have, that's inside of us inherently. Yeah,
that's the funny thing. Every one of us have it. And yet, yeah, you're right. We're going to war over, hey, why is it? That's the why is the problem.
Yeah. And that person looks different on the outside than me. Oh, they're a different gender, a different skin color. Oh, different. Their expression of how they do things spiritually is different. And we fight over it, which is
kind of separation. The separation, I think that, that you talked about in your book, because that's where so much of the problems in our life come from. Man.
And I call it reverse proof. So if oneness truly is something that both sides of the aisle agree on, science and spiritual and religious people really agree in oneness, Buddha, Jesus, they all taught it, quantum physics today teach it. If that is true, well, then reverse prove that the opposite would mean that that's our challenges. And I agree with you, separation, right? Us versus them, black versus white. In our political system in the United States today, all the divisiveness, that's how you control 7 billion people. You tell them they're different and they're separate, versus telling them they're one, and then you can divide and conquer. So for sure.
Or you tell one side we're good and the other side is bad. It's just and magically every side they're good.
And everybody on one side pointing and saying 100% of all of our problems are just because of that. Yeah. Is that really true? And again, in the book, I dive down on the political side, where if you really digest either the right or the left, you're like, well, there's a lot of hypocrisy on both sides of the aisle, right? For sure. Yeah. If you're being honest, Yeah.
Well, what I liked about when I read this sentence, and it made such an impact on me, it said, when you're in that position, it could be, again, anything, whether we're talking political parties, or the warring things that are going on, or just an interpersonal, one-on-one type of problem that stems from the separateness that we're talking about. You said in the book what you should do, and I thought it was great, because it's basically being empathetic, which is my go-to love theory, is that you should ask yourself a question: what is it that other person loves so much that they're willing to do what they're doing? Because sometimes we just automatically see the other side as bad. We're good, they're bad, they're doing something bad. But we need to actually pull back a little. Indeed, they may be doing something bad, but that shouldn't be our, we have to add this extra feature in, I think is what you're saying. And we need to quickly look, what are they doing that they love so much that they're willing to do that, and we see it as bad, and maybe we're doing the exact same thing and need to ask ourselves the same question. I thought it was
I appreciate that. A lot of that
down on that.
Yeah, Neil Donald Walsh, who wrote Conversations with God. When I read that book, I went and spent a week with Neil, and he had a big impact on me, and I got a lot of that from him. And then really the next level to me. So what you're saying, I agree with, and it's going, instead of, there's a lot of energy around forgiveness. You got to forgive, which, okay, let's set that aside for now. But what's higher than that, I've learned, is going to a level of understanding, which is what you're talking about. Okay, why in the world would that person do a bad business deal? Why would they be violent? What's going on in their world that would cause them to do that? And if I seek understanding, number one, it does create empathy, like you said, which is a beautiful thing, because you're automatically putting yourself in a place of, I want to understand that person. And if you're honest with yourself, even though I've never committed a violent crime, have there been times I've been angry and pissed off? Well, yes. You can see some of that, at least the emotion. Maybe the behavior is different. I haven't killed or murdered somebody, but man, I've been angry and I felt like doing that to people.
So the first step in that, like I've been there plenty of times, because every time you get screwed over, that's where you go, right? Instead of asking yourself, well, so now I'm going to start to ask myself, hey, what is it that person loved? Even on this idea, when I saw Russia invade Ukraine, immediately I thought, oh, okay, boom, there's a situation. What does Putin love so much that he's willing to go to war over? It should be the question.
Yeah, 100%.
To start out with. But so how can you not take sides, ask that question, and then where does that take you? I mean, where does that make it good? At what point are you getting somewhere with a question like that?
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's a great example. It's happening as we speak. And so if you keep asking that question, okay, what does Putin love so much? And I would suggest if you keep asking that question and go all the way upstream, everything is motivated by love. Some people talk about fear versus love. Okay, well, talk about a fearful act. Okay, he's attacking another country or something like that. What he's really seeking, though, is ultimately that love, that I would say the source of love that we all came from, that's inside of us. He's disconnected from that in some form or fashion. Just like anybody who's ever done anything, quote unquote, wrong or bad, they're seeking love. Now, granted, that's a perverted, messed up way to seek love. But at the end of the day, every single one of us, when we make decisions like that, including Putin, we're basically saying there's not enough of something. There's not enough love. There's not enough resources in the world. There's not enough whatever. And so we're coming from a place, we're taking that wanting to be loved and fulfilled and abundant, and that connection to oneness and abundance we all have. And we're saying, no, that doesn't exist. So I'm going to go out and do something that's false or not as good. I'm going to try and get that love through a messed up way of doing it. I know how elegant that wasn't explaining it, but every single act, there are no exceptions to this. Every single act is an act seeking that love. Sometimes it's twisted and perverted, but it's ultimately seeking that love. And the more we can be centered in that, then we're acting out of good, versus when you see an act that we would all agree we're not endorsing or is bad, be it rape, murder, war, that individual and the people that are following that individual are seeking that love and validation inside of them. They're just doing it in a very messed up way,
Because, I mean, we see that with like these mass shooters and stuff, and then you find out later that they grew up in a horrible home environment. So obviously they're seeking the love they never had or didn't realize. But then it somehow gets twisted. Now you're doing it. So in business, when we're doing a deal and a guy or woman, because I'm sure equally they will screw you over at some point. How do we approach that? I mean, how do we handle that when that happens to us without going insane, like you say, and sit there and daydream about their demise?
And it's in business, you can't sit back and do kumbaya as well. So what are some tactical things? Number one, to me, it really does go back to that centeredness and that intuition in your gut. People talk about gut or intuition. Man, trust your gut. And in business, trust your gut, right? If you feel something is off, if you feel your spidey senses, whatever you want to call that, with an individual on a business deal, number one, I would say trust your gut. Number two, I would be proactive. Like, have these conversations up front. And I always like to put myself in the other person's shoes. Okay, what are they thinking? What is the benefit to them? And how can I serve and make sure things are good for them? In the coaching world, I know you and I come from how much value can I create for that person? And there's a value exchange. And as long as we have a mutual basis for doing business, money's going to flow and energy flows and there's service. So as much as you can proactively set that up and, do business with the right people, serve and love people, there are still going to be times people are going to screw you over. This idea of understanding, okay, why are they doing that? That helps us, I think, individually deal with that. But at the end of the day, it's still going to happen. And you either learn or you win, right? And you and I back in, 2005, 2006, we actually had started a relationship, but there was a big business decision that I advised you, hey, go one way and don't go the other. And you didn't take my advice. And
I regretted it.
Learning thing.
Yeah, I learned from it. Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't lose, you learned. And so I just tell people all the time, you win or you learn. And so that's the opportunity they have. If you get screwed over in a business deal, you yourself can go back to, well, I'm still okay. Am I okay even though the business didn't go well? Did I lose money? What can I learn from this? And ultimately that goes to, what is your purpose in life? Are you just a business person, or is your business a vehicle to create the wealth and the time you need to go do what's important? You be with your family, if you got a mission to accomplish. And if somebody has their identity wrapped up into that business transaction, well, they're going to freak out. If it was like, oh, that sucked, that didn't work out well, but I have a higher identity, I've got a bigger purpose of this, my business just provisions that purpose, then they have a different reaction to it. That's been my own experience myself. When I've made mistakes, it's like, dude, am I going to learn from this or am I going to do something about it,
And there's something that never stops. This is why we all have to figure out how we're going to deal with failure, for example, because people call it failure. Right now, you're calling it learning, which I love. That's the way I like to look at things. But I also am not afraid of the word failure, so I embrace it. I look for failure because I learn every single time what not to do. I also, in fact, we were talking last night on another call about, how failure can usually help you. I mean, let's say it always helps you 100% of the time, right? Yeah. Now, the idea is not to fail. So, and it's why we go to advisors like you, right? You give us a piece of advice. We're going to listen to you. Sometimes we say, I'm not so sure. I'm going to go do it this way. So that's going to happen. And then, you fall on your face, your project fails or something, or it doesn't go the way you thought. Then you got to go back. And once you learn from that, again, it's just a process. So now you go to the next deal, right? Yeah. What do you learn when that happens, right? If somebody gave you advice, you didn't take it and you failed, you should be going back to that person and asking for more advice. See, this is what happens, right? And that's what I did even with you back in the day. And we got it to another project that led to some of my stuff going on to foreclosure.com, which even today, I'm still good friends with the owner who subsequently sold. These are, and this is the thing. One of the things I really admire about you is your networking ability, and it's like everybody out there. I don't know if there's anybody in the top tier of our industry that you don't know, that you haven't connected with, that doesn't come to you for advice. Are you working on any new projects right now, or how can somebody who wants to work with you seek you out, and what would you be doing for them?
Yeah, great question. I appreciate that. Yes, I am. And so if you go to my website, davelundgren.com.
Now, to be exact, that's Dave-Lundgren, LUNDGREN.com.
You see, I do individual private coaching. And a lot of it is CEO types, folks that everybody, if I name their names, you'd recognize. A lot of them in the info space, and they're coming for either business coaching, hey, help me with my business, or And it inevitably leads to every aspect. So life coaching, I don't really like that term, but guidance, I'm a Sherpa. So for sure, I love those individual clients. And I would say, just having been an entrepreneur for 22 years, having run the business mastery team, I really am 1,000% confident if somebody's, between 2 employees and 1,000 employees and, up to 200 million, I understand those organizations really well. And actually my master's degree in family therapy taught me to look at things systemically. So that's one thing I do is individual coaching, a deep dive on businesses. And then I'm still in the real estate game, doing turnkey, a lot of new construction, turnkey, build to rent, because I believe wholeheartedly in for the average American, just to set their money and forget about it, not looking at a screen every day, but if they really just want to grow their wealth long term, buying a solid piece of real estate that they hold long term is, you invest $1 and get 4 returns. You can't beat that. And so I'm a big fan of that and getting people as much of that as they can to create passive income for themselves. They can go do their day job. They can go do whatever they want. Let's grow their wealth through real estate. But something you said I really want to hone in on, because you talked about relationships, which is huge. And in any business transaction, there's only 4 currencies. That's it, 4 of them. And most people focus on money. Oh, that's an obvious currency. Knowledge is a currency. Time is one. But you brought up the 4th one, which is relationships. And out of those 4 currencies, to your point, relationships have paid me more than all those other 3 combined. So I would encourage you to develop all 4 currencies. Get as much money as you can in the bank. Buy back as much as your time as you can, and get as much knowledge as you can for sure. But man, relationships, it really can make a difference. So I appreciate that, and a good relationship and a mentorship. Like you said, man, if I want to learn the land business, one phone call to you, how much time and pain in the ass can that save me? Because you've walked through and you've seen the landmines, you stepped on a few, and you can look back and be like, hey, do or don't do that. That's the quickest path. In fact, the quickest path to success is getting a mentor who's done exactly what you want to do. I would say that if you're not going to do that, I would always advise to get a mentor. But the only other advice I would tell you, if you're not going to do that, then do the exact opposite of what everybody else is doing in the marketplace. That'd be the second piece of advice I'd give. Go the opposite way. If everybody else is eating McDonald's, don't eat at McDonald's. Go the other way.
and find your own way, because you're going to have to find a completely different way to catch up.
But even that, yeah, and that's, I think, your audience. I mean, your audience, they're already entrepreneurial. They're looking for that next level, and if you want to be part of that, 5%, you're going to have to not pay attention to what social media and media is feeding. You're going to have to, and the good thing is it's the information that you can find it. The truth is out there, and truth ultimately is a utility thing to me. Like you were saying, somebody gives you advice, go out and do it. If it bears fruit, awesome, it was true. If it didn't, okay, cool, you still learn from it. But utility, if there's actual something that happens from that, well, that's the ultimate definition of truth. It did work. I got the fruit. It's right here.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I've seen it throughout my whole career. There's no doubt about it. If you can get with somebody who is just an expert in that area, no matter what it is, if you want to know about that subject, which is really what you have to do, always thinking niche down, go seek out the master in that area. If it's land, you should be coming to me, the land mogul. But if it's coming up, and getting into these other aspects of your life, just like what you help and coach people on, that they really need to seek you out. If somebody is seeking you out, what is it that you can change wise? And because we'll go ahead and wrap this, but what kind of changes can somebody expect to their business when they work with you?
Well, I just literally this morning, ironically, got a text from a private client, gentleman I love and respect, known him for years, and he's run a very successful high-level real estate investing business for 20 plus years. And just in some of our work and conversations, he implemented some things that I mentioned to him, and some of the things we've talked about, like, dude, take your time. You're a CEO, get centered, get away from everything. And one particular individual on his acquisitions team, he had one conversation and drove it down, and that individual went out and did a deal for $250,000. He's like, that would have never happened, before we started working together a couple of months ago. So that's one palatable example. Like, one conversation can go out and have that kind of a massive impact. And this guy, he's obsessive about measuring stuff. So he's literally measuring his heart rate, his sleeping patterns, and all this. And all these numbers are literally going down. Like he's 50% better on all of those metrics that he's actually measuring his body. So his stress levels, his sleep are better. His business is making more money because he's able to take this time and truly get himself centered so he can be a better CEO. So that's one quick example. I literally got the text from the guy. I'm going to screenshot it. And that's kind of stuff that motivates me. And I know you as a coach, same thing. That success, it's fun to go out and make money in our businesses, all of that. But it's also great when you have a student or a client or, a coaching client that comes to you and just says, oh my gosh, John, dude, I flipped this land thing. Yeah. I know that fills you up and drives you as well.
Yeah.
So it's exciting.
It's a win for them, but it's also a win for us. And and I think as most entrepreneurs are, we're always after the win. Yep. And it doesn't matter if it's necessarily our win. If we had any part at all in it, it counts. We're going to take it. Well, thanks so much, Dave. I really appreciate you being my guest on the podcast today. And I really cherish our connection, our friendship over the years, and for many more. If please, everybody listening to this, if you like what you're hearing, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, whichever one you're listening to. Also, you might be watching this on YouTube, etc. Please leave a like, subscribe, and a comment too. That just helps us grow the podcast even more. Again, thanks so much, Dave. We will talk to you again soon. Have a great day.
Thanks, John.
Bye, everybody.